You are standing among thousands of Athenians, in the very heart of the city, where every word is like a stone hurled into eternity. Today, Demosthenes is speaking here, a man whose speeches can shake the state, unite or divide the crowd, or perhaps just lull every listener to sleep faster than any street lullaby. As the crowd yawns and languishes under the blazing sun, you suddenly realize the fate of an entire civilization is decided not in battle and not in the council, but right here in the monotonous hum of endless speeches where hope and weariness have long become indistinguishable. Welcome to Athens, but before we begin, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and let me know in the comments which city you are watching from and what time it is there. I am genuinely curious to see who has joined us. Now, make yourself comfortable. We are about to begin. You wake up before sunrise, not because you are eager to greet the day, but because the city of Athens does not care for your sleep schedule. The air is heavy with the smell of yesterday's olive oil, stale bread, and the barely masked anxiety of citizens who know that their democracy requires endless talking. You dress slowly, more out of resignation than hope, and look out through the slats of your window at the labyrinth of narrow, crooked streets below. Dawn in Athens is not golden or glorious. It is gray, persistent, and somewhat sticky, like the dew on the worn out sandals you are about to slip on. Your destination, as always, is the agora, the pulsing but tired heart of the city. The agora is less a marketplace of ideas and more a marketplace of complaints, small deals, big egos, and the persistent sound of arguments echoing from marble to dust. Today, however, there is a rumor in the air that Demosthenes himself will speak. Demosthenes, whose very name provokes a mixture of awe, dread, and the sincere wish that maybe, just maybe, the speech will be over quickly so you can get on with your daily routines. But you know better. Nothing is ever quick in Athens, especially not when a man has something to say and an audience to torture. On your way, you pass by men who are already rehearsing their grievances. The tax rate, the price of wheat, the latest military disaster, and, inevitably, the state of public toilets. They nod at you, not because they know you, but because they hope you might agree with their complaints. In Athens, every greeting is a prelude to a monologue. A man bumps into you and launches into a tirade about the potholes on his street. You escape by pretending to have an urgent philosophical appointment. It is remarkable, you think, how democracy depends so much on the art of pretending to listen while secretly planning your own speech. The agora is a theater, and every citizen is an actor, an audience member, and a critic all at once. No one really listens, but everyone insists on being heard. When you arrive, you see the familiar sight: the battered columns standing like exhausted old men, the crowd slowly gathering, faces half awake, and the subtle tension in the air, a mix of hope and the expectation of disappointment. The sun, at last, begins to force its way above the rooftops, illuminating the marketplace in a wan, in different light. The vendors are setting up, the philosophers are stretching their tongues, and you, like everyone else, are searching for a spot where you might hear something interesting, or, at the very least, be able to lean against a column without anyone noticing if you nod off. Demosthenes is not there yet, of course. Great men in Athens are always fashionably late. Instead, you are treated to a prelude of lesser orators, each one eager to prove that they, too, can speak at length about matters no one truly cares about. The speeches are as interchangeable as the complaints. Someone rails against corruption, another decries the decline of traditional values. A third insists that the solution to all problems is simply to listen more. A suggestion met with groans and not a few ironic laughs. It is democracy in action, endless debate, little agreement, and the strong suspicion that nothing will ever change. You are, it must be admitted, not immune to boredom. Your mind wanders as you look around at the crowd. You see old men who have been here for decades, young men eager to prove themselves with words, women in the shadows straining to hear the latest news, and slaves tasked with holding their masters' places in line. Everyone has come in search of something: wisdom, excitement, a chance to complain, or just a break from their chores. You are here because you want to see if Demosthenes can actually live up to the legends, or if he is, like everyone else, simply another voice lost in the sea of words. Someone beside you nudges you and whispers that Demosthenes is the only man in Athens whose voice can make the birds fall silent. You find this hard to believe, but you are willing to see if it is true. The crowd seems to sense something is about to happen. The chatter quiets just a little, and there is a ripple of anticipation, or at least a break in the monotony. And then finally, the man himself appears. Demosthenes, neither tall nor imposing, not particularly handsome, and with a face carved by years of argument and disappointment. He takes his place, surveys the crowd with a gaze both sharp and weary, and waits for silence. He does not rush. Great speeches in Athens are never hurried, for haste is the enemy of importance. As you wait for him to begin, you wonder, not for the first time, why anyone comes here at all. Is it for the hope of hearing something truly important, or just because it is what you have always done? The city, the agora, the endless talk, it is all woven into the fabric of your days. Perhaps, you think, there is comfort in routine, even if the routine is profoundly, spectacularly dull. Still, the expectation lingers. Maybe today will be different. Maybe today, Demosthenes will say something that cuts through the fog of words and makes you see the city and yourself in a new light. Or maybe you will simply be grateful if he keeps it brief. But this is Athens, and brevity is the rarest of virtues. Before Demosthenes can utter a word in the agora, your mind, perhaps in self-defense against the boredom that so often envelops public life in Athens, wanders backward in time. You recall, with a kind of resigned admiration, the stories that swirl around Demosthenes like so much Athenian dust. These are tales every child hears from his mother, every student from his teacher, every citizen from whichever neighbor is loudest on any given day. Athens is, if nothing else, a city where everyone knows everyone else's business, especially when that business involves endless self improvement rituals that are as tiresome as they are legendary. According to the tales, Demosthenes was not always the orator whose speeches could, allegedly, still a crowd and perhaps even the very pigeons roosting on the temple roofs. Once, he was a boy with a speech impediment so severe that even the most patient of Athenian listeners would glance heavenward and mutter silent prayers for brevity. His words came out tangled, his tongue rebelled against the simplest syllables, and his ambitions seemed destined for the same dust as so many broken Athenian dreams. No one, not even his tutors, expected much. Athens, for all its talk of merit and possibility, has always known how to spot a hopeless case. But Demosthenes, it is said, refused to accept his lot, where others would have quietly taken up some other, less public trade. He devised a regimen that even the city's most ascetic philosophers would have found a touch excessive. The details, recited ad nauseum by every would be orator since, have become almost as famous as the man himself. Demosthenes, the story goes, went down to the shore each morning, collecting pebbles, never too large, never too small, and stuffing them in his mouth before attempting to speak. If you believe the stories, passers-by could witness him gesticulating wildly at the sea, cheeks bulging, speech garbled, as he fought against the tides of both the Aegean and his own inadequacy. The image is, you must admit, as comical as it is tragic. You imagine yourself attempting such a routine, standing by the water's edge with a mouthful of stones, shouting at indifferent waves, while fishermen cast nets and shake their heads in disbelief. It is hard to decide whether this is a mark of genius or simple madness. In Athens, the line between the two is thin, and most would agree that a man is only considered a genius if he succeeds. Failures are simply lunatics with no audience. Demosthenes did not limit his regimen to the seashore. He built himself an underground study away from the distractions of the city, where he shaved half his head, ensuring, by this odd act of self sabotage, that he could not show his face in public until his latest oratorical improvements had been satisfactorily rehearsed. Imagine the dedication, or perhaps the sheer stubbornness, required to isolate oneself for months on end, practicing speeches to the darkness, to the rats, to whatever gods listen to the pleas of the truly desperate. The streets of Athens, you reflect, are filled with men who have given up at far lesser obstacles. Most would have traded public humiliation for a comfortable anonymity without a second thought. You recall, too, the tales of Demosthenes standing atop cliffs, straining his voice to outshout the wind and waves. His goal, according to the stories, was to strengthen not just his tongue, but his lungs, to be heard and over the chaos of the marketplace and the endless mutterings of the city's critics. It is a noble ambition, you suppose, but one that seems doomed in a city where even the gods grow weary of human complaints. You think back to your own brief, humiliating experiment with public speaking. There was that festival, now mercifully faded in memory, when you attempted to recite a short speech in honor of the harvest gods. You had rehearsed in your head 100 times, but the moment you opened your mouth, your neighbor began loudly recalling the price of barley, and someone else began hawking onions. Your words, like so many others, dissolved into the Agoran air. You have never tried again. It is so much easier to complain about speeches than to make them. Yet here stands Demosthenes, the product of thousands of hours of self inflicted misery. The result, or so you are told, is the most powerful orator Athens has ever produced. There is a certain irony to this. The man who once could not be understood is now the man everyone must listen to, whether they wish to or not. His fame rests less on what he says than on the fact that he is impossible to ignore. It is said that the other orators, those men whose ambitions outstrip their talents, regard Demosthenes with a mixture of envy and contempt. Some mock his eccentric methods, whispering that a man who spends so much time alone with stones and shadows cannot be entirely sound of mind. Others, less honest, try to imitate his rituals in hopes that some of his strange genius will rub off. You once heard of a particularly desperate young man who tried shouting at the sea for an entire month, only to return with a sore throat and no improvement to his speeches. Now he sells fish by the dock and tells everyone he gave up oratory because the city is not ready for greatness. Still, you have to respect Demosthenes for his perseverance, if not his methods. Most men in Athens are content to complain about their lot, to blame their shortcomings on fate or the whims of the assembly. Very few are willing to transform themselves into something better, even if the process is absurd, humiliating, and apparently endless. As the prelude of lesser orators drones on, you wonder what drives a man to such lengths. Is it ambition, pride, the simple refusal to be forgotten? Athens is full of men desperate to make their mark, to have their names remembered when the stones of the agora have crumbled and the city itself is only a legend. Most fail, and their stories vanish into the background noise of history. Demosthenes, at least, has achieved something remarkable. Every citizen knows his name, if only because his voice is impossible to escape. You glance around at the gathering crowd, at the old men with arms crossed, the bored youths pretending to listen, the market women half interested in the proceedings, and the slaves who wish they were anywhere else. All have heard the stories of Demosthenes' training. All, perhaps, harbor secret doubts that any amount of discipline can overcome the inertia of the city. Yet all are here, waiting, because there is always the possibility, however faint, that a single speech might cut through the haze of words and reach the heart of Athens, or at least give them something new to complain about at supper. The sun climbs higher as Demosthenes steps forward at last, his reputation preceding him like a herald. You brace yourself, not for inspiration, but for another lengthy exercise in Athenian endurance. In the back of your mind, you wonder whether greatness is simply the willingness to persevere where others give up, to fill one's mouth with stones and shout at the wind until, somehow, someone finally listens. This, you reflect, is the true spirit of Athens, not glory or wisdom, but the refusal to be silent, no matter how hopeless it seems. It is the hour when the agora of Athens most resembles a beehive. If the bees had grown bored with honey and decided instead to discuss the flaws of each other's wings. The sun is now well above the horizon, pouring indifferent light over the gathering of citizens, stoic columns, and the dust that seems as ancient as the city itself. You take your place among the crowd, pressed between the brittle patience of an old potter and the fidgeting impatience of a young apprentice. The agora is neither comfortable nor clean, but it is tradition, and tradition in Athens is as stubborn as a mule. Around you, people jostle for position. Some are here to be seen, to make sure that their presence is noted, so that when the day's decisions are debated in private, their voices can at least claim to have suffered the performance firsthand. Others are here for the novelty of the occasion, or because they are too bored to invent a better excuse. There are those who, like you, nurse the small hope that something important will happen, even as they suspect it will not. Most, however, are there simply because it is what one does. The life of the city is a great tide, and its citizens are grains of sand carried by routines older than the city walls. The crowd murmurs, shifting and shuffling, the noise rising and falling with the rhythm of collective boredom. There is no assigned seating, no clear hierarchy, only the unwritten rules of proximity, deference, and the strength of one's elbows. Old men lean heavily on their walking sticks, the weight of years and public disappointments etched into their faces. Young men try to look earnest and attentive, as if mere effort might one day make them important. Some women, veiled and careful, lurk on the periphery, straining to catch every word, perhaps for their husbands, perhaps for their own secret judgments. Slaves hover on the edges, eyes lowered, serving as human placeholders for the absent elite. The platform where the orators speak is unimpressive, a stone block worn smooth by decades of ambition. You stare at it, remembering the countless feet that have scuffed its surface, the voices that have risen and fallen into oblivion, the promises made and broken on its modest height. The agora is not a temple of wisdom, you reflect, but a theater of endless repetition. Every issue has been debated before, every argument rehearsed so often that even the gods must have grown tired of listening. At last, Demosthenes steps up. He does not hurry. Great orators, you have noticed, rarely do. Instead, he surveys the crowd, letting the tension build with the quiet confidence of a man who knows his every gesture will be analyzed, repeated, and, most likely, misunderstood. His robe is unremarkable, his expression grave. He clears his throat, a subtle signal that the time for casual conversation is over and a hush falls. Not complete silence, of course. This is Athens, after all, but the noise subsides enough for him to be heard. The first words come slowly, deliberately, as if he is weighing not just their meaning, but their endurance against the apathy of his listeners. You focus, or at least try to, pushing aside the distractions of the morning, the lowing of cattle, the drone of flies, the distant argument between two fishmongers over a questionable catch. Demosthenes' voice, trained against the wind and the sea, carries well. There is no thunder, no drama, just the measured cadence of a man who knows that persuasion is less about brilliance and more about persistence. He begins, as orators must, with the expected references to the glory of Athens, the burden of citizenship, the need for vigilance. These words are as familiar as the stones beneath your feet. You have heard them from a dozen mouths, in 100 speeches, always at moments when the city needs to believe in itself, or at least pretend to. There is talk of ancestors, of old victories, of the dangers that lurk beyond the city's battered walls. Demosthenes invokes the gods, the laws, the very soul of the polis. You find your attention wandering. Someone behind you coughs, and the sound is a welcome relief. Despite yourself, you begin to observe the crowd. Some are genuinely listening, faces set in rapt, earnest focus, as if the fate of their household depends on each syllable. Others are less successful. An old merchant beside you has closed his eyes, mouth open, breathing softly, a man unashamed to sleep through history. A trio of philosophers argue quietly about whether the soul can truly be moved by words, or if, like everything else, rhetoric is just a clever trick for getting more olives at dinner. Every so often, someone nods sagely at a phrase Demosthenes utters, regardless of whether they understood it. The power of public speaking in Athens, you realize, is measured not by enlightenment, but by the number of agreeable nods extracted from a tired audience. As Demosthenes moves from introduction to argument, his rhetoric grows denser, weaving together facts, warnings, and allusions so tightly that only the most devoted listeners can follow without an effort. He speaks of foreign threats, Macedonian ambition, the need for unity, the dangers of complacency. His words are sharp, his logic relentless. Yet for every well-constructed sentence, there is a corresponding yawn from the crowd. You try to follow, making mental notes of each point, but your mind keeps drifting to mundane matters. The quality of the bread you ate this morning, the errand you forgot to run, the way the light glints off the shield of a nearby guard. The truth, as you are forced to admit, is that listening in Athens is an endurance sport. The speeches are long, the arguments complex, and the tradition of public debate demands patience as much as intellect. Some around you resort to coping strategies. A woman quietly embroiders. A young man sketches patterns in the dust with his sandal. An older citizen chews thoughtfully on a piece of dried fig. No one seems to notice. Here, inattentiveness is a form of self-defense. Still, every so often, a line lands with enough force to ripple through the assembly. Demosthenes, despite all the obstacles, is capable of moments that cut through the fatigue, a phrase, a warning, an image that briefly awakens the city's collective sense of purpose. You feel it too, a sudden prickle of awareness, a reminder that the issues discussed are not just words, but the future of your city. For a moment, the crowd leans forward. As quickly as it came, the moment passes, and the tide of indifference returns. When Demosthenes pauses for emphasis, you look around and realize that most people are pretending to listen. Eyes glaze, heads nod at random intervals, and the collective will to endure is palpable. It is a kind of civic ritual, this public sleepwalking. You are not sure whether to be impressed by the discipline or saddened by the futility. As the speech nears its end, Demosthenes delivers his closing appeals. He calls for action, for sacrifice, for vigilance. His words are heavy with the weight of repetition. You sense the crowd preparing for release, the tension of attention about to snap, the relief of knowing the ordeal is almost over. The final applause is polite, obligatory, a murmur of hands meeting in the air before everyone resumes the real business of the day, grumbling, gossiping, negotiating, remembering just enough of the speech to repeat a fragment at dinner. You step back from the platform, legs stiff, mind buzzing with half remembered phrases and a vague sense of accomplishment. You have survived another public speech in Athens. You are no wiser, perhaps, but you are, at least, more practiced in the ancient art of looking interested when you are anything but. The agora empties slowly, the dust rising in little clouds behind the departing citizens. In the aftermath, it is hard to say what, if anything, has changed. The problems remain, the arguments continue, and tomorrow there will be another speech, another chance for Athens to believe in itself, if only for a moment. You trudge homeward, reflecting on the curious power of oratory, not to transform, but to persist. In Athens, you realize even the act of listening is an act of endurance, a small, quiet heroism masked by collective fatigue. The speech of Demosthenes ends, but the day is not over. If Athens is the city of endless talk, then today is its crowning festival. You remain standing among the crowd as citizens shuffle and reposition themselves, ready not for rest, but for another round. There is a certain kind of resigned discipline to this routine, a tired choreography performed daily beneath indifferent skies. You stay, partly because leaving early would seem cowardly, partly because habit has dulled your will, and partly because, deep down, you hope that something will happen to break the monotony. Someone whispers that the next speech will be one of Demosthenes' Philippics, his famous tirades against the threat posed by Philip of Macedon. Even the least attentive citizens know these speeches by reputation, and even the youngest children have heard their parents mutter another Philippic with the same tone they reserve for thunderstorms or higher taxes. You brace yourself accordingly. There is a brief interlude. Someone's sandal has broken, and the crowd parts with sluggish annoyance while the owner hobbles to a safer place. A merchant loudly insists that he could solve the city's foreign policy with a single clever trade deal, and a philosopher offers an unsolicited analogy about the ship of state. All of this is as expected. Athens is a city where everyone is both an expert and a spectator, and where every interruption is secretly welcomed as a break from seriousness. When Demosthenes rises again, the hush is less attentive than before, more like a practiced silence, the sort of silence that comes from having heard too much. He launches into the Philippic, his voice carefully measured, his arguments sharpened by years of repetition and the knowledge that even now most will not be moved. He paints the image of Philip not as a distant king, but as a creeping shadow over Greece, a threat so insidious that it is almost easier to ignore than to fight. You are struck by the detail and urgency in Demosthenes' words. He describes, with weary precision, the alliances forming to the north, the failures of Athenian diplomacy, the dangers of inaction. His tone is urgent, but the faces around you are unmoved. A woman near you adjusts her headscarf and squints at the sky, perhaps calculating how much daylight remains for her chores. An older man leans on his staff and sighs, as if each sentence adds a new stone to the already heavy weight of worry pressing down on his shoulders. A group of boys, supposedly there to learn citizenship, doodle in the dust and nudge one another with the quiet glee of those who know that none of this is truly meant for them. Demosthenes' famous phrases, words that will one day be studied by scholars, inscribed in books and recited by students long after the city's stones have cracked, fall with the heaviness of inevitability. He denounces apathy, calls for action, warns of doom. Every line is the result of careful practice, yet in the open air of the agora, the force of the speech is blunted by the familiar rhythm of civic fatigue. You catch yourself drifting, your thoughts wandering to the price of barley, the taste of yesterday's wine, the petty grievances you share with your neighbors. At one point, Demosthenes recounts the disasters that have already befallen other Greek cities at Philip's hand. His voice trembles with controlled outrage, but you notice that most of the crowd simply nods along, not in agreement, but in resignation. Everyone knows the stories: cities lost, treaties broken, heroes fallen. Yet the future remains as opaque and unchangeable as ever. In Athens, warnings are as common as dust, and just as likely to be swept aside. You watch the faces of your fellow citizens. Some look to Demosthenes for hope, others for validation of their own pessimism, and still others merely for the end of the speech. One particularly attentive man mouths the words along with Demosthenes, as though repeating them might give him some private sense of agency. Nearby, a woman shakes her head at each mention of Macedon, her scowl deepening as the speech drags on. You wonder what she fears most: the foreign king, or the endless prospect of more speeches about him. Demosthenes shifts from warning to exhortation, urging the assembly to unity, to bravery, to the kind of collective action that Athens prides itself on but seldom achieves. He invokes the memory of Marathon, of Salamis, of victories past, knowing that the ghosts of old glories are often more persuasive than logic or threats. For a fleeting moment, you sense a stirring in the crowd, a ripple of pride, a brief remembrance of what the city once was. But the moment fades as quickly as it came, drowned by the undertow of habit and inertia. It is at this point that your attention, despite your best efforts, begins to falter again. The sun is hotter now, and sweat runs down your neck. The arguments blur together: alliances, mercenaries, taxes, duties, threats, appeals to virtue, to history, to whatever fragment of collective willpower still survives in the hearts of the citizens. You remember your own household's struggles, the disappointment in your father's voice when he spoke of the way things used to be, and you feel a kinship with all the weary listeners who have gathered in the agora simply to witness, not to decide. When Demosthenes finally concludes, the applause is half hearted, but it is applause nonetheless. In Athens, every performance, no matter how familiar or dreary, deserves at least a nod of appreciation. The crowd disperses slowly. Some linger to discuss the speech, to repeat its choicer phrases, to argue about its merits, or to simply gossip about the orator's appearance. A few manage to recall an entire argument. Most can only summon fragments, words about Macedon, warnings about complacency, the shadow of some faraway danger. You make your way through the departing throng, overhearing snatches of conversation that range from political analysis to complaints about the rising cost of olives. A few citizens vow to do something, anything, but their voices are lost in the general hum. By the time you reach the edge of the agora, you realize that the city, for all its talk of heroism and action, remains stubbornly itself, talkative, anxious, a little tired, and deeply attached to the rituals of listening and forgetting. At home that evening, you try to recall the key points of Demosthenes' Philippic for your family. Your words stumble and trail off, your memory already muddy with the details of daily life. Was it about Macedon or about Athens itself? Was the danger real or only a pretext for another round of speeches? Your listeners nod, perhaps out of politeness, perhaps because they too have learned the Athenian art of appearing attentive. As night falls, the city grows quiet, and you reflect on the day's performances. The speeches, for all their urgency and grandeur, have become part of the fabric of life, persistent, repetitive, necessary, and, in some peculiar way, comforting. In Athens, even the most dramatic warnings lose their edge to the slow grind of routine. You lie down to sleep, your mind filled with echoes of warnings and the persistent drone of public debate. Tomorrow, you know, will bring another speech, another crisis, another round of passionate words and tired applause. In the end, you think, perhaps that is all Athens really asks of its citizens: to listen, to endure, and to keep returning, day after day, to the agora and the ancient, unending performance of civic life. You walk home in the thickening dusk, the sound of Demosthenes' words still echoing, though already faded, in your mind. Athens behind you settles into its evening rituals. The agora empties slowly, the stone benches cooling in the shadow of the columns, the last echoes of applause lingering only as a memory of noise. Somewhere, a street vendor shouts the day's final bargain, and distant laughter mixes with the clop of hooves on uneven paving stones. The city seems unchanged, and you, for all your effort, feel unchanged with it. Your feet find their way along streets you know by heart. At a corner, a pair of men argue about politics with the weary zeal that comes after decades of disappointment. Did you hear Demosthenes? One asks, not really seeking an answer. Of course, the other replies, but what good is another speech? You pass them, feeling their cynicism settle over your thoughts. Like the dust of the road, you wonder whether anything ever truly changes in Athens, or whether the whole city is trapped in a gentle, endless spiral of debate and decline. At home, your family awaits your account of the day's proceedings. They gather as you enter, not because they expect news that will alter their lives, but because the retelling itself is a comfort. You repeat what fragments you remember. Demosthenes spoke of Philip, of danger, of the need for unity. The crowd listened, or pretended to. Some nodded, others dozed. Your words trail off as your memory blurs. Already the details have begun to dissolve. Was the warning more dire than usual? Was there some new call to action? Or was it all, as so often, a repetition of what had been said 100 times before? Your spouse sighs, then launches into a familiar lament about taxes and the price of bread. Your eldest child, eyes glazed, asks why orators never speak about things that matter to ordinary people, such as the state of the public baths or the shortage of figs. You have no answer. Democracy, you think, is a city's conversation with itself, a conversation in which most voices echo, few are remembered, and almost none are heeded. Night falls, and the city grows quiet. The same stars shine over Athens that once watched Theseus and Pericles, and you reflect on how little their light changes the lives below. Lying in your narrow bed, you listen to the creak of shutters, the muffled arguments from next door, and the distant barking of a dog. Somewhere, another citizen is no doubt preparing a speech for tomorrow's assembly, convinced that this time words will do what swords and silver could not. You wonder at their optimism, at their faith in the transformative power of rhetoric, and at your own, dulled by so many years of repetition. The truth settles on you with a kind of ironic comfort. The city's greatest orators may speak with the thunder of gods, but the weight of their words is dulled by the softness of pillows and the heaviness of daily fatigue. Democracy in Athens is less an engine of change than an exercise in endurance, a ceaseless relay of complaint, exhortation, and weary applause. You suspect, as you drift toward sleep, that it was always thus and always will be. You dream perhaps of the agora, Not the real one, but a dreamlike place where the speeches never end and the crowd is forever just on the verge of understanding something profound. In your dream, Demosthenes stands upon his battered stone, his voice clear, his logic irrefutable. The citizens around you are attentive, moved, inspired, ready at last to act. But even here, as the dream deepens, the faces begin to blur, the arguments unravel, and soon enough, you are once again nodding off among your fellow Athenians, lulled by the endless tide of public words. Morning comes too soon. Athens wakes to the rattle of carts, the bickering of neighbors, the sigh of the baker opening his shop. The events of yesterday are already receding, replaced by today's concerns and tomorrow's worries. Someone reminds you that the assembly meets again this afternoon, and you nod, though you feel neither excitement nor dread, only the persistent, gentle weariness that is the true inheritance of all citizens. You wonder sometimes what will become of the words spoken in the agora. Will they survive in marble inscriptions, in school lessons, in the guarded memories of a few stubborn historians? Or will they, like so much else, fade into the background hum of the city's eternal present, always talked about, never quite remembered? In your more ironic moments, you suspect the latter. Athens will go on debating, complaining, listening without hearing, and forgetting almost as soon as it learns. This, you realize, is both its doom and its comfort. You pass through another day, its details indistinguishable from all that came before. You greet your neighbors, endure another speech, buy your bread, and listen to the same arguments about Philip and taxes and the decline of morals. In the evening, as the sky grows dim and the lamps are lit, you find yourself once more recounting the day's oratory for your family. They listen, or pretend to, just as you did. The words fill the room and then are gone, leaving behind nothing more substantial than the faintest sense of shared endurance. And so it continues. The cycle of speeches, of listening, of forgetting, and of telling the same stories again and again. In Athens, greatness is measured not by change, but by the persistence of tradition, the unending rehearsal of democracy's rituals, performed with equal parts conviction, resignation, and irony. As you close your eyes for the night, you think not of Demosthenes, not of Philip, not of glory or doom. You think only of the strange, exhausting, strangely reassuring life of the city, a city where to listen is to tire, to speak is to be ignored, and to remember is simply to prepare yourself to forget again. In the end, you realize democracy is not a drama of transformation, but a quiet, collective art, the art of doing the same thing day after day with just enough hope to come back tomorrow and listen again.